Hello and welcome back to the International Economics course. So the eighth theme considers international macroeconomics, and I start by introducing the concept of current account. So let's first consider the system of national accounts, where the major concept, of course, is the gross domestic product, GDP. So I took this table from the core textbook that decomposes the uh, gross domestic product GDP to components following the expenditure side of how the GDP is measured. So if you have followed my introductory economics course, you may have seen this table before. So from the expenditure side, the GDP consists of household consumption C, government spending G, and investment I, plus some kind of additional smaller correction factors. And in the country that has international trade, we also need to take into exports and imports. So the exports and imports contribute to the GDP in the system of national accounts. And following the terminology of the system of national accounts, current account is simply the difference between exports and imports. So we have this kind of formula of CA, current account, equals exports minus imports. So this is also in the table. Notice that if you add up these percentages, they do not add up to 100% unless you take the minus sign for these imports. So I have here highlighted with this red box these components of the current account. So this is just the exports minus imports. And perhaps it's also, to start with, from the empirical perspective, interesting to look at the composition of GDP in the USA, Eurozone, and China. So these figures relate to the year 2013, but the situation has been similar also since then. So notice that for the USA, these numbers are percentages of the total GDP, so we are just breaking down the GDP to components. But notice for the USA, exports were smaller than imports, so we would say that in the USA, current account was in deficit. In contrast, in China, the exports were larger than imports. So we would say that the current account in China is in surplus. So this is this kind of observations we made also earlier when we looked at this global patterns of trade in this one of the first lessons of this course. One more thing I want to point out from this table is that if you look at the Eurozone, so here it's not so important if it is a surplus or deficit. In 2013, it was in surplus, but notice how large the percentage of exports and imports was of the GDP. So this also highlights that the Eurozone is much more dependent on global trade. So, for example, the threat of potential trade war between USA and China would be, of course, also affecting the Eurozone very much, because Europe is much more dependent on the international trade, on its exports and imports. So this kind of decomposition of the GDP can help to see what kind of components contribute to the GDP. But we can also then further decompose the current account also in a similar way. So it's possible to break down current account to further components. Of course, here we have exports and imports, but we can follow this kind of accounting identities as here. And notice first that if we then take a current account from this accounting identity of the GDP, we can see that current account can be written as the difference of the total output Y and the domestic consumption, investment, and government expenditure. So it can be helpful also then to see how current account relates to national savings. So if we define national savings S as the portion of output Y that is not devoted to household consumption C or government purchases. So if we define S as a difference Y minus C minus G, then using these equations, we can also see that the national saving S is the sum of domestic investment I plus current account. So of course, in an open economy, investors can choose to invest in their home country, but also they can invest in foreign countries. So in that sense, this current account can be an indicator of the building up of capital stock in foreign countries. So foreign investments can contribute to the current account surplus. Then we can also distinguish between private savings and government savings. So I will do that in the next slide. So if you find these accounting identities somewhat complicated, it can be helpful to write them down on paper, and you can then play around with them with time. So I will proceed a bit quicker here in this video, but of course these equations you can then consider with more time if they look somewhat complicated. So next we will break down this total savings S to two parts. So we can think of S as a sum of private savings SP and public saving SG. So these superscripts P and G now refer to whether it's private saving or public saving. And we draw this distinction by introducing taxes T. So if we remember that national saving was the difference of total output Y minus consumption C minus government expenditure G. So now we define private saving as the output Y minus taxes minus private consumption. So private saving is how much of the total output net of taxes is not consumed. And then the public saving we can define as the difference between tax revenue minus government expenditure, so T minus G. So notice that if we add up private saving and public saving, so SP plus SG is the same as national saving S, because this taxes T is just a transfer from the private sector to the public sector. So this minus T and plus T would cancel out if we add up this SP and SG. So this allows to then if we write down this SP, and we can then use this previous accounting identities. So I don't go this now in very much detail to save time, but from these identities we can then write down that current account CA must be equal to private saving SP minus investment minus government expenditure G minus T. So G minus T is this additive inverse of public saving. So it is public deficit in that sense. So we can think of G minus T as the government deficit. So this formula of current account that is now highlighted with the blue background color indicates that the current account depends on both private saving and public saving. So current account, the first component, we can think of the difference between private saving and investment. So if the private saving increases the investment, then this is like contributes to current account surplus. But then also government deficit. So if G minus T is positive, if government is spending more than it's collecting tax revenue, it has a negative contribution to the current account. So in the USA, there was this kind of historical observation of twin deficits. So as I have indicated here on the bottom of the slide, following the Krugman et al. Textbook, that if we suppose that the private saving and the investment are relatively stable over time, then it can be that the government deficit. So if the government increases its expenditures without collecting tax revenue to match this expenditure increase. So if the government deficit rises, then it can lead to the so-called twin deficit, that also then the current account falls to deficit. So the purpose of this kind of decomposition is to highlight that the current account depends on many issues, both private saving, investment, and also the government deficit. So of course, it's not directly self-evident that if the government runs deficit or is increasing taxes, that it necessarily affects the current account immediately, because also it's not self-evident that the private saving is independent from the government spending. And as the final topic of this video lesson, I introduced the concept of Ricardian equivalence. So remember that one of the most influential classical economists, David Ricardo, we met in the context of the comparative advantage in one of my first video lessons. So the same David Ricardo also has this is whom we refer to by the Ricardian equivalence. So David Ricardo was arguing that if, for example, the government tries to stimulate economy by lowering taxes, then the rational households then will anticipate that the government needs to then raise taxes later. So then they respond by increasing their private saving. So this kind of economic stimulation doesn't necessarily work as effectively as one could think of. Other way around, if the government tries to lower their deficit by increasing taxes, then it can lead to also that the private sector will lower its saving rate. So this is what is known as the Ricardian equivalence. And a table on the bottom of the slide I took from the Krugman et al. Textbook that indicates that this kind of Ricardian equivalence had held at least in the European Union in the late 1990s. So notice that the current account surplus is relatively constant in this table over this 5 years observed. So there's some fluctuation, but not any drastic change in the current account surplus. Investment I is also fairly stable at about 20% of the gross national product. But then what changes is the private saving S. So notice that the private saving was almost 26% in year 1995, and it falls down to 22% in 1999. So there's like stable decline in the private saving rate, and it matches with this government deficit. Government deficit is decreasing from minus 5.4% to minus 0.88%. So this is this kind of example that when the governments are raising the tax rates to decrease the deficit, then private households then can respond to it by also lowering their saving rates. So that meaning that of course influences this government's ability to, for example, then influence its current account surplus or deficit through domestic fiscal policy measures. So I will continue then and give a bit more empirical examples of the current account in the next lessons, and we will start with example from the US balance of payments. See you then. Bye bye.